over to John Taylor.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be doing this again. I know I missed the one at the beginning of the month. We're going to continue talking about cognitive biases and how they affect relationships. And so today we're going to talk about the impact of what they call a certainty bias. And this is something we do like both in self-reference and other reference. So we do this with information about ourselves, and we do this about information we think we have about other people. Basically, what a certainty bias is it is referring to human beings' tendencies to make up stories about everything. And we make up stories really, really fast, especially about things that we don't understand, that are overwhelming or big or threatening to us in some way. Think about mythology. From a mythological perspective, thunderstorms are gods having battles. From a mythological perspective, a drought is explained not by weather patterns and pervasive global wind currents, but it's the gods are either pleased with us or displeased with us. It's one of the hardest feelings for human beings to sit with is uncertainty. And as a result of us having brains that can do language and make meaning, we make meaning out of everything. And we tend to believe that the meaning we make out of things is true because it provides us certainty, which is an answer to uncertainty, which is difficult for us to feel. There's lots of places in our relationships where this certainty bias will come and settle in, and it will give us a narrative that is it's kind of self-supporting, meaning it's hard to find evidence that contradicts this narrative. But this certainty bias comes and settles in because our brains don't like contradiction. And they don't like missing information. So it's really, really automatic that we fill it in with some kind of story about what this means. Where this applies to couples in recovery, I think, is much of the time from partners of addicts that I work with or in coupleships, one of the big questions that they ask their addicted recovering partner is, why did you do this? And that can be like a global question. It can be like this specific behavior, why did you do it? Usually when the partner's asking that, they have a theory already. They have a, if I can say this without being offensive, they have a myth about that. Just like their addicted partner has a myth about why they did it as well. And so what I see a lot, especially in these couples, is they'll trade their myths back and forth, and neither one is really helped by it. Just like if, you were to see some weather phenomenon you'd never seen before and somebody told you some clearly mythical story about this. The clouds look that way because there's a spaceship coming into land, and that's what makes those clouds. You're really lucky to see this. Like you probably wouldn't buy it. You'd probably look at that with a lot of skepticism, and you would probably think, I'm never asking this person about weather patterns again because what they feed me is a bunch of hooey. Couples do that with each other with that why question all the time. So with all of these cognitive biases, all of these thinking errors that we've talked about the last couple of months, there are some ways to counteract these tendencies. There's not a way to eradicate it because these are biological and neurological. Again, because your brain, number one, doesn't like uncertainty and contradiction, and number two, you're a meaning-making creature. The stage is set for you to make up all sorts of stuff about everything that's going on. So you're never going to stop that process, but we can counteract it. Again, and I've said this a lot of what we do in relationships is great for us as individuals and terrible for our relationships. So I'm borrowing this concept here from Stan Tatkin and PACT therapy, and he'll always say, wait for the second bus or wait for the fifth bus, meaning that often the first explanation that comes along, it's really attractive to take that, or the first idea of what am I going to do in the situation, it's really attractive to take that because it gives you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, and it counteracts uncertainty. But usually if you'll wait to see what else comes along, you maintain access to more useful information. Because another thing that human beings do, once we have a theory, whether we've actually proven that theory or not, we become really married to that theory. It's hard for us to take in evidence that counteracts what we feel already. That's why when scientists take the last year or developing vaccines, they do what's called a double-blind trial, and that means the person receiving the medicine and the person administering the medicine don't know who's getting the medicine. Because even with something like that, our biases can be so strong it can skew what actual data is. So when we can train ourselves, when we can challenge ourselves to just kind of sit back and breathe and let me see what other theories come along, let me see what other stories I make up here, we can maintain access to more useful information. We do that, however, or when we do that, however, we trade off security. So that's a really hard thing to do because we can't create certainty for ourselves when we're saying, let me just see what's going on here. So a really common example I see is, an addicted individual whose spouse is, rightly angry, maybe even enraged, can say and do cruel things. The first bus that comes along for that addict is often, well, my partner hates me and now they're out to get me. And you would see a lot of evidence to do that because a lot of betrayed and hurt spouses, they don't do kind things as a regular course of action in response to finding out about radical betrayal. If you wait for another bus to come along and maybe you take in some information and talk to other people, you might read a book like Out of the Doghouse by Dr. Rob, and you might realize, oh, this is how people respond to hurt and fear. Maybe this has nothing to do with whether she loves me or not, or whether he loves me or not. And maybe I'm just getting raw fear and raw hurt. But it takes time. It takes time for other buses to pull up. It takes time for other narratives to form. So it's a hard thing to do. It's also hard to do because when we're presented with uncertainty, especially uncertainty that is connected with survival, and all of our primary relationships are survival necessary relationships, we become physiologically activated. And this greatly influences what we're able to see and what we're able to think. I think, as I was thinking about this the last couple of weeks, I think there's 3 layers of filters that are related to how we're physiologically responding to new information. The first filter layer I would call is the threat vigilance layer. And this means we're going to have a hard time perceiving the world any other way than I'm alone. There's enemies all around me. Everything's dangerous. This is one of the reasons why I would say for both addicts and spouses, it's a tendency to isolate in recovery. Because once we start seeing the truth of the situation, the world has now changed in drastic ways. And I have yet to meet a person an addict in recovery or a spouse that doesn't go through some phase of like, oh my gosh, I'm alone in this. With addicts, we call it shame. With partners, we talk about hypervigilance, and we talk about that kind of that threat response. That's very physiologically driven. When you find out that your partner is not who you thought you were, you're essentially living and sleeping with a stranger, and that's a terrifying experience. The second filter I would say we come across is the underappraisal of threat. So in the brain and the body, we're always doing what we call opponent processes. And that means our body and our brain without training aren't very good at doing middle ground. They do extremes really, really well. So usually I'll see after a response to everyone's a threat and, my world doesn't make sense anymore. Sometimes very quickly we move into, oh, that was an overreaction. I made too big of a deal out of that. The world or my partner can't be that bad. Nothing's wrong. And so we can move to an underappraisal of threat where we're ignoring signs, we're ignoring red flags. We're ignoring that curiosity part of us that might have some really important questions to ask, but they're scary questions to get the answer to. So we have the opponent process of threat vigilance, which is the underappraisal of threat. And those two things can be cyclical in and of themselves. We can ping from one extreme to the other. I see the addicts that I work with do this all the time in the beginning as they're coming out of denial and recognizing the impact and the meaning of their addictive behavior. Oh my gosh, I've been so terrible. Oh my gosh, this has been dangerous to people I love. And then sometimes the very next breath, very next session, it wasn't that big of a deal. I was, I'm too hard on myself. I just need to focus on, getting better. So we move from hypervigilance to a state where we're not protected enough, and that's where those two extremes really feed each other. Um, the third round, and I think that this is, again, it's greatly influenced by how we feel physiologically, is what I would call nuanced explanation. And this is where, one thing we work on very, very early, especially with partners, I do this with addicts too, though, is post relapse or post scary situation, what's your plan for creating safety for yourself? For a lot of partners, that's I'm going to get some space and some time from my addicted loved one, so I can kind of recenter. I can get my boundaries intact again. I can figure out what I'm going to do. For addicts, that's a lot of like, I'm going to call people I'm in program with. I'm going to check in with my therapist. I'm going to remove myself from situations that are intensely triggering or dangerous for me. So once we're in a place physiologically where we're separated from the situation emotionally, for sure, sometimes physically, um, we can take a viewpoint of, I'm okay right now. Let me look back at what just happened. Let me look at the before, during, and after. Let me think this through. Let me talk this through. How does this look from the standpoint of safety that I'm in right now? That's where I see a lot of stories, because they're still stories. They're actually, in my experience, between the interaction of two human beings, there's actually not a truth that we can verify, because it's so based on what each person's experienced. But when I'm in a place of safety, the myth that I can make up or the story that I can see about what's happening is usually far more nuanced and far more accurate, far more useful than the stories we make up when we're either in high threat or numb to the threat. So this is where it's really, really important, if you want to have options for textured, nuanced relationships that are about the two people in them, not about the issues they're dealing with. It's important that you're able to establish those boundaries. It's important you're able to establish ways to get yourself physiologically safe. Again, I talked about reaching out and talking to people in program. This is where learning meditation, this is where using exercise, going for walks, things that calm your body down, gives your brain more opportunities to take in more data and way more complex data. So a couple of practical things to work on. Number one is, especially when something unexpected happens, make sure that before you move into problem solving mode, you have at least 3 or 4 different explanations of why that thing might have happened. Because usually, again, what we'll do is we'll go with our first gut instinct, this is what happened, and we'll start working a solution, which, based on how our brains filter things, probably isn't a real accurate solution, or isn't a solution that actually addresses the whole problem. It's more of a fear-based, I just got to get out of here. If that first response actually has merit, your brain and body will keep coming back to it. If you're practicing that, like, all right, let's see what's going on here. If there is intense threat, or if there is that kind of, oh my gosh, reaction, you'll keep coming back to it. Your body won't leave that if it needs it. Second suggestion would be track the situations from beginning to end. This is where like journaling comes in handy, or at least like talking through with a sponsor or a therapist all points of the cycle. Because to you in the cycle, what you perceive is going to be greatly influenced by how you feel in that moment. So it may be, my addicted partner just presented this information to me that's really, it's scary to me, it's disturbing to me. But then, we talked a bit and we kind of lost track of the subject, and we ended up watching this show that we really like, and we laughed a lot, and it was a pleasant evening. When we're in the moment, we can lose objectivity of the whole picture. So when you're talking to somebody about these events, beginning, middle, and end, they can help you see your cycle. They can help you see your tendencies. I'm someone who, instead of tending to forget the past and move on, I tend to hold on to it a ton. And then of course, I have these interactions with people that continue to get worse and worse because I'm bracing for a big fight and I'm not updating the information that I have. This also helps you to see patterns that you have in your perceptions. Like I said, you may have a pattern of giving people way too much of the benefit of the doubt too fast. You may have a pattern of never utilizing benefit of the doubt. You may have a pattern of, I can see this kind of wrong and this kind of hurt, but never that kind of hurt. Keeping an actual record helps you to stay truer to the cycle. If you, my thought is, if you don't write it down, you'll probably distort it in some way, or you'll continue to distort it in some way. The third one is learn about trauma, addiction, and how emotions work. This will build what's called theory of mind. What theory of mind is our ability as human beings to perceive emotion and motive in other people. And to do that accurately. That doesn't make us human lie detectors, or it doesn't, give us like some kind of clairvoyant access to other people's minds, but it's more grounded in the, I guess it's more grounded in the kind of like, if I were in that situation, I might have done something similar, because that's what theory of mind is. So when you learn about how these things work in people, you're able to make more accurate guesses. You're able to have more accurate theories. Rather than theories that are just based on your historical experience or present scary interactions. And I'll just end here with a word about honesty in relationships. This is hammered to death in recovery. It needs to be, and here's why. This system of being able to perceive accurately what's going on and hold a nuanced view, it's very, very delicate. And there's nothing that smashes it faster or more thoroughly than gaslighting, deceiving, lying, intentionally distorting the truth, because it casts doubt on the person's ability to listen to their own experience. So if you want a relationship that can have trust long term, you have to be very, very vigilant about gaslighting, hiding, deceiving, distorting, lying in any way. Because if you do that, time will always expose the truth. And what you'll end up doing to your partner is really lessening their ability to listen to their own inner voice and trust their ability to synthesize data. Because they may, for a while, believe what you say. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt here, or that makes sense to me. When later on the truth comes out, as it always does, your partner will lose their ability to calibrate, and they'll have a very, very difficult time ever feeling safe with you again, maybe even safe in other relationships. So if I could, I guess, end this with a plea, please make a big part of your recovery and a big part of your relationship interaction honesty and transparency, because that's the baseline foundation that any kind of trust is built on. And trust is what allows us to do these really difficult, complex things together. Without that, we're just in a one-person system war stance, looking over our shoulder to see who's going to stab us in the back next.
Thank you, John. Can you explain, just again, just kind of go back through what you went through, theory of mind, just a little bit more about that, because
yeah. So theory of mind describes a set of perceptions and skills that allow us to accurately perceive other people. Theory of mind is something that folks on the autism spectrum really struggle with, because it's very abstract. So I have a handful of clients who are autistic, and they struggle in relationships because they'll see what their spouse is doing and they'll say, well, that's not logical. Why aren't you doing the logical thing? This would be logical. And we really have to work on that. What do you think your partner might be feeling, or what kind of emotions do you think they might be making these decisions through? That's what theory of mind is, recognizing that um, just like I can say something that I don't mean, and I can do something with unintended consequences, other people can as well. Our motivations are complex. So when I can put myself in somebody else's shoes, and when I'm just in my world and I see their behavior and I say that's crazy, makes no sense, I put myself in their shoes and think, what might have they been feeling or thinking at this time that produced that outcome? Okay, well, that makes a little more sense. I'm still not okay with it, but I can see where this comes from. That's what theory of mind is.
So almost going back to, like you said, come up with 3 or 4 explanations before you
Yep.
react. I mean, what is possible, what is real, and maybe reality check. And but it's, you said it, both of us, like if you and I are arguing, I'll have one story that I've made up, and you'll have a story that you've made up.
Mm.
We can't really reality check each other, can we? Because we're both stuck in a story.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where, sometimes our desire to get out of uncertainty is greater than our desire to help our partner feel safe. And so we get tied to these narratives, we jump on the first bus that comes by, and we hold on to it because we worry that there will never be another good option or another good explanation. And for real repair and real trust to return to a relationship, we have to not abandon our perceptions, but we have to open them up a bit. Uh, we have to be willing to admit, maybe I didn't get the story right from the get-go, or maybe the story I'm telling myself is really influenced by my level of fear. Maybe it's really influenced by some past things. Maybe it's influenced by how my partner communicates, not necessarily whether they're honest or not. There's some people, like I was talking with a client yesterday about this, in the Amanda Knox trial. I don't know if you guys remember her. Um, she was in some European country as an exchange student, and her roommates were all murdered gruesomely, and everyone was certain that she was guilty. Because of how she presented. When they took her to the crime scene, she didn't have any emotional reaction. In the courtroom, she rarely had any emotional reaction, but none of the evidence supported that it was her. In fact, the evidence supported that it was somebody else. And when the innocent verdict was handed out, a lot of people were outraged because they were saying, clearly she's innocent, or clearly she's guilty. That's not how people respond to this kind of stuff. There was a context, and there was an emotional context of what was happening for her that actually makes a lot of sense why she didn't show emotion. But we just don't, we can't always know exactly what's going on with a person just because of what we see or what they say. We have to let some more options open up to really get the full picture.
So, when I mostly work directly with addicts, and we talk about, we don't use the term certainty bias. We tend to say cognitive distortions, or
Mhm.
um, but I think we're talking about something really, really similar here. It's a belief system that drives us towards certain thinking and certain behaviors. And it goes back to, for me, shame tapes. Like, I'm not good enough, so I make up stories about how you're going to respond to me, uh, that may or may not be true, but these are the stories that I make up, and I believe them, and I have to sort of dismantle them. And it's a real process. And it's interesting to look at this from, or for me to look at it from the relationship angle, where you're making up stories too.
Yeah.
Oh God, we're a mess.
Yeah, early in my recovery, I don't remember exactly who I got this idea from, but I was so fearful of rejection and people being disgusted with me, like I wouldn't share anything. Um, I wouldn't even like invite people that I wanted to spend time with me because I knew that they were going to say no. And the idea that somebody handed me was, why don't you give them the opportunity to say no instead of you deciding that that's going to be the answer? Why don't you give them the opportunity to actually reject you? And what that required me to do is, first of all, I had to take these risks, and then I had to pay close attention to what they were actually saying. When someone would say something like, "Oh, I can't do that today, but how's Thursday?" I would hear that as no. But really what they're saying is, I want to do that with you. I can do it Thursday. Can you do it Thursday? um, and we can get so certain in how things are going to go that we actually forego the whole relationship interaction and we start just having a relationship with ourselves. um, as we're kind of like viewing this person as a puppet of our own fears. So it's really, really important to check out every theory you have, try to disprove yourself, and
So
listen close.
one last question. Can these myths actually be healthy sometimes for individuals and relationships? And if so, what does that look like?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like, so I work on this with couples all the time. If you can make up myths that are detrimental to your relationship, you can certainly make up myths that are really helpful to your relationship. Um, so for example, I usually have couples when they get to this point in couples therapy, I have them make declarations to each other about what their relationship is. So one of those declarations might look like, we are the kind of relationship that embraces humanity and is a safe place for both of us to learn. Now, that's a myth because that couple is not going to do that 100% of the time. But if that's the story they're telling each other, they will strive for it. And they'll correct when they're off base with that, which can be really, really powerful. I was working with a couple a few weeks ago, and that is one of their governing principles, one of their coupleship myths. And one spouse kind of called the other one out. Hey, I came to you with this failure that I had, and I know that it impacted you, but you nailed me to the wall instead of making it safe for me to learn. That's not what we agreed to. And the partner said, you're right. We did agree to that. I'm sorry. And they went back and they replayed and they made repairs and they got in alignment with that myth again. And it wasn't as if that had never happened, but they were able to find their way back on course. They were able to say, this is actually what we want to provide each other. This is what we're shooting for, not this defended, angry thing that we're doing. So, the myths can be just as powerful going the other way.
And I think that one of the points here is that if we have this myth and we stick to it and we really believe it, we can use it to help our relationship or destroy our relationship. And maybe we need to identify the myths that aren't working for us.
Any myth we have will push us to do things that we weren't willing or able to do without the myth. So that's why you've got to watch the story you're telling yourself so closely, because it can either tear a relationship apart that doesn't need to be torn apart, or it can build something fantastic that wouldn't have existed if you hadn't dreamed of it.
That's fascinating. Okay. I think we could do a whole hour on this, but we have some questions, and I've taken up more than half our time questioning John. What is your guidance with confronting in person long-term?
Uh-oh. I can't tell if I'm the frozen one or if Scott's frozen. Did I freeze for everybody? Oh, Scott froze. Okay. All right. Well, while he's working that out, I actually have the question up here, so I'll read it. What is your guidance with confronting in person a long-term mother enmeshment, emotional incest, and physical, emotional, sexual trauma that occurred 30 to 40 years ago? Meaning, is it generally recommended to try and work through these issues by confronting those perpetrators in person? The answer is yes and no. So first things first, if there's any kind of abuse or boundary violation or person that caused you trauma, the first thing first is you have to establish safety for yourself before you engage with that person. They've already shown you that they are not reliable to provide the safety you need when you need it. So don't go confronting as a first step as a means to establish safety for yourself, unless that confrontation is, hey, you don't come around here anymore, or I have a strict boundary here. But as far as talking about what happened and working through it, that's much better done from a place of emotional stability and security for yourself before you go and bringing somebody else into that. You may decide as you develop some safety for yourself that hashing it out emotionally with that person is not the best way to go. It may feel like your only option in the beginning when there has been no talking or resolution or exploration, but that can change over time. So I would say first, work on your own safety, your own peace of mind, and then definitely with a sponsor, therapist, support people, talk through what the costs and benefits might be of confronting somebody who hurt you like that in the past.
Hi, I'm back. My internet ended on me, and so I relogged in, but I can't access the questions that we had, John. So maybe you can.
Okay. So the next question says, I'm the SA and I had my spouse come to my CSAT meeting yesterday. CSAT is a certified sex addiction therapist. It has never gone well, and yesterday was no different. CSAT says, I've done all the work and told my wife that the relationship may be over. Then he denied saying that. Well, my wife and I heard it, and I heard it. Is it time to find another CSAT? My wife always has a gut feeling he wasn't partner sensitive. I'm not married to my CSAT. I'm married to my wife. Thoughts? That second statement, good statement. You aren't married to your therapist. You're married to your spouse. So that's definitely something to consider. I would say as a therapist, I try to shy away from declarations of somebody's healed and declarations of this relationship is over. Because I think that's actually way too personal. And I would even say that's way too sacred for me to weigh in on with an opinion. I can certainly weigh in on, I think we might need to work on this, or this might be an issue, or why don't you look at this? I can help people explore feelings. But this is really an issue, and I'm encouraged to see again this second or this last line here. This is an issue with thirds. In any intimate relationship, for it to work, you and spouse are number one with each other, number 1 and 2. Everything else is number 3. Everything else in the world, our house, the children, our religion, our therapists, and couples who are securely functioning together, they handle thirds correctly. So if you have a third that is advocating for something to happen in your relationship that you and your spouse don't see a need for, you don't understand why they're advocating for it, you and your spouse ought to put your heads together and say, what are we going to do about this? That may be you go back and talk to the therapist and say, listen, we're not of the opinion that this relationship is over, and we need to work with somebody who can support our decision to stay with this. It may be that we say, and I've had this experience with marriage therapists, we leave a session, we look at each other and say, I think that was our last session. But that's a decision that you and your spouse make together. If you two are not of a mind that it's time to give up on the relationship, you'll want to make sure that you are working with people who are supportive of that decision and can help you see eyes wide open the implications of making that decision. I think there are some relationship issues that could be really handily dealt with if there was a divorce. But again, that's not my call as a therapist, that's the individual's calls. If we don't choose divorce to solve our problems, that means we've still got the problem to deal with. And that's may not be easy, and we may not, feel like we're skipping through daisies together doing that. But that's one of the consequences that comes with our ability to choose. So again, I really like what you're saying at the end. I'm not married to my CSAT, I'm married to my wife. Orient there first. You two decide what needs to happen to support the choices you're making with each other.
And from the betrayed partner standpoint, we always counsel betrayed partners who want to save the relationship. Make sure that your support network, if it's your sister and your mom and your best friend, make sure they understand that you are committed to saving the relationship, even though he cheated on you, because otherwise you're going to have them whispering in your ear, you can do better, or, dump the, what, or, and it's not going to be helpful to you.
And
And
I would say the inverse of that, if you're an addict in recovery and your actions have horribly traumatized your spouse and you're committed to seeing that through with them, um, even if it gets really awful, make sure your support network understands that. And they're not whispering in your ear, haven't you given them long enough? Shouldn't they be better by now? No, I'm not putting a timeline on that. I've picked up both ends of the stick here, and my intention is to make this work.
yeah, and the other thing I want to say is every relationship is different. I mean, I have a couple of friends and they got married 7 years ago. I just went to their 7th anniversary brunch the other day. Um, it is a relationship that makes no sense to me. Um, none. One of them is very subservient to the other. It's very, like literally like walking a step behind, and you know it's a cultural thing. But it is a relationship that they like and it works for them, and they're both very happy in it. And I just think, who wants this relationship? But they do.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself, it's not my relationship. I would go insane in that relationship, but it's theirs, and it is what they want. It is what they want. They negotiated it before they got married. This is what our relationship is going to be. They mutually agreed.
This is a mantra I repeat probably 14 times every working day. I don't have to help these people get a relationship I want to be a part of. I have to help them get a relationship they want to be a part of. And they chose each other. I didn't set them up. They're in each other's care. They have to figure out what to do. That's keeping committed relationships prime with each other, first with each other. And if that's what you two are choosing, everybody in your support network needs to understand that and be able to support that. Otherwise, they might lose their spot in your support network, or they might need to lose their spot in your support network.
So, John, what do you tell a couple when they want to stay together, but all the signs point to them not staying together, and everyone around them is whispering in their ears, "Why bother?" I mean, what do you do with them to support them? And
I'm usually really clear with them about that. This doesn't seem to be a place where either of you feel safe or happy or secure or getting the things that you want from a relationship. It also seems like the option to leave is not something either of you desire. So let's talk realistically about what you can expect from this. Your partner's always going to do this thing because they've shown again and again that they're always going to do this thing that either annoys you terribly or makes you feel radically unsafe. If that's what you guys are choosing, if that's what you guys want to do, what's your policy around this? We can't pretend like this doesn't exist in your relationship. How are you guys going to address this? Not how are you going to fix it, but how are you going to address this reality in your relationship? Another place I go sometimes, and I've seen this help mitigate some of those behaviors, is when I have a couple. I'm thinking of one couple in particular that they were just awful to each other as a course of things. And I said to them when they were getting into the sniping back and forth, I said, "I bet your children love dinner time." And they looked at me and they're like, "Why?" And I'm really uncomfortable right now. I bet when you guys do this around other people, it's really uncomfortable for them too. And a lot of times I'll work with couples on kind of increasing that social awareness. Like, yeah, you guys are choosing each other and you do the thing that you're doing. You also have other relationships that respond to this. Are you giving those relationships what you want to be giving them? Are you giving them the impression of who you are that you want them to have? So, at the end of the day, whether to stay or go, again, that's a sacred decision between partners. And the job of a therapist or a support person, I think, is to help them have their eyes wide open, not make the decision for them.
okay, thank you. Do you ever ask them what is it that keeps them together, just to like remind them,
Yeah.
we really do love each other, or whatever,
Even with couples that I think are really loving and you can tell they're enjoying the relationship, occasionally, just to keep it focused, I'll say, "Why are you two a good idea? Why should the world support the idea of you two being together?" And I make them stand there and justify the continuance of their relationship, because that's focusing, because that also keeps them, it keeps them aimed at what's critical for them to provide each other, which is what relationships are about. I give you something you can't get in any other way. You give me things I can't get in any other way. And that's one of the big reasons why we're together, is because we have this exclusive membership with each other.
So you make them come up with the story that's good for their relationship.
Yep. Yep.
Well, okay. Um, I'm assuming there are more questions. I still can't see them.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I just have one more right now. So if you have any other questions, put it in the Q&A. It says, I've been married for 28 years. I'm the betrayed partner / wife. My husband has a mother enmeshed son with, my partner is a mother enmeshed son with ongoing emotional, sexual incest, sex addiction, intimacy disorder, personalities and dissociation due to developmental trauma, and early adverse childhood experiences. Throughout our marriage, my husband seemingly has difficulties to leave his family of origin with continued emotional enmeshment with his mom, acting as a substitute husband to her. In addition, my husband has been acting out with the same person for the past 14 years. My discovery date was November 2020, with many partial disclosures. What is your recommendation for applicable treatments for my husband, me, and our marriage? Can he treat childhood developmental trauma, sex addiction, and emotional enmeshment all at once? If not, what order of treatment is best? Thank you for your advice. Wow. So I feel like I need like a 4-hour assessment interview to actually be able to answer this question really well. I'll say some things generally. When it comes to enmeshment, I see that tend to be, it's a wrench in the cogs of getting other things moving. Because at the heart of an enmeshed relationship, it's loyalty to preserving the relationship at all costs. So if that's at great cost to me, if I'm supposed to play this role as mom's surrogate husband, even if that, is tearing me apart mentally and emotionally, in an enmeshed family, the commitment is to the roles, not the individuals. So if I'm presented with, a menu like this of options or of things that people are dealing with, if I see enmeshment there, I think that's pretty important to address early on. The only thing that I would say moves above that is issues related to trauma. Like if there's acute PTSD symptoms, if somebody's dealing with like flashbacks, nightmares, dissociation related to abuse, that has got to be stabilized first. But then, very soon after that is kind of looking at the enmeshment piece so that we can get a person a little more individuated. You are an individual, not your role in a family. You can still choose to be part of this family. But in order to support your own health, you've got to choose a role that is actually going to work for you, not the one that you were just given. What usually ends up happening in treatment, especially in outpatient treatment, we're doing all of it all the time. There's not really a here's what we're doing first and then here's what we're doing second. But in inpatient treatment, where it can be really helpful, you can kind of target, isolate, and stabilize around specific issues. And if that's something that hasn't been looked into, I would reach out to the folks at Seeking Integrity, and they can either do fantastic work and help this in their program, or they can point you in the right direction for that initial stabilizing, which I think is usually when there's big sexual trauma with addiction and enmeshment. Inpatient's usually a good idea.
Yeah, this is our typical client at Seeking Integrity Los Angeles. Lots of mother enmeshment, emotional incest, covert incest, and overt incest. Lots of sexual and emotional trauma early in life, often with the mother, sometimes with the father, or sometimes with another caregiver. And inpatient treatment is about uncovering the problems, identifying all of the problems, and then sort of prioritizing, breaking through denial, which is a big thing, and then prioritizing what needs to happen first. It's prepping people for the lifetime of work to come. There's no cure for any of this stuff. All of these things that you brought up, and John can disagree if he does, uh, it's a lifetime process dealing with all of this stuff. I mean, I have covert incest issues in my past, and I think I'm over them, and then something will pop up, and more work to do. And this is 20 years into the process. But for me, I can say getting my addiction under control had to be priority number one, and then dealing kind of at the same time with PTSD reactions. My reactionary stuff was kind of simultaneous with that, and then later actually delving into the underlying issues and doing the deeper trauma work needed to happen, and still happens. I mean, my addiction is very under control. I mean, I'm as a matter of fact, 2 days from now, I'll have 19 years sober from this addiction.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, and but I still have work to do on a regular basis, and I still need to go to meetings and be on webinars and learn on a regular basis. So, thoughts, John?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That was actually the meditation in your book this morning, I think, was this is a lifelong thing. And the reason why I think that's important, a lot of people experience that as a death sentence, and I can understand why. But really what it is, it's an opportunity to correct something that went very, very wrong early on. And that's quality attunement that is focused on keeping an individual cared for, safe, and given what they need. In many ways, I see what recovery offers as a blueprint or an opportunity to go back and address what needs to be addressed. Like, for example, my 8-year-old still doesn't put himself to bed, and it's not because he wants to stay up late. It's not, he's not playing games. He doesn't look at, but at his core, he's an anxious child. And sending someone off, goodbyes, are really difficult for anxious people. And so it took me a while to realize, like, oh, this is just a need that we attune to, not a behavior to correct. So he gets read to and he gets sung to sleep every night by either me or my spouse. And the reason for that is to attune to his anxiety, give him help that he needs with that in the moment, and most importantly, let him know, like, he is not alone in dealing with that. I don't know if I'm going to be doing this with him when he's 12. We'll see. But that attunement, and we do this, that recovery gives us an opportunity to do this for ourselves. The attunement says, I'm not going to worry so much about why this is going on. I'm going to worry more about doing the right thing with it in this moment. So recovery pushes us to be around people who care about us. What a terrible thing. It pushes us to talk about the feelings that we can't share with anybody else. What an awful way to live your life. I say that sarcastically because it really is. It's a reattunement. It's an invitation to care for yourself on a daily basis, the way that you should have been cared for from day one. It's an opportunity to right some of those wrongs.
Yeah, for me, being an addict is not a gift, but having my life crash down to the point where I needed to do something about my addiction has been a real gift, because it has put me into this recovery process where, yeah, I worked through the in the moment issues, but now I get to work on the deeper stuff that, and I'm a much happier and healthier person for being in recovery than I ever would have been if my life hadn't come crashing down. So, I mean, I'm really, really grateful for it. I can actually read the question that just came in. So the sex, they all disappeared when it went away and came back. So anyway, should a sex addict deal with trauma after they start recovery? Is it good to do this if the person is older, like a senior? Is it still good to deal with trauma if you got a 65-year-old addict who just entered recovery?
Yeah, so I'll answer the questions in reverse. So first of all, I think it's always a good time to address trauma because there are so many effective treatments for trauma, so many effective approaches to it. chances are if you find someone who's been trained and certified to work with trauma in some way, you will get relief. Which, to me, when I'm working with someone with trauma, I believe that trauma can be resolved. I just don't know how long it takes or when. But that relief of having somebody who's there to sit with you, to teach you how to regulate your emotions when difficult things come up, and to work on unburdening the past. I don't care if you have 50 years or 50 days left to live. I think everybody deserves a shot at that. And if we can alleviate suffering, why wouldn't we? The first part, should you deal with trauma after you start recovery, like Scott had mentioned, I think stabilizing addiction is pretty important early on. Addiction is re-traumatizing by definition. And a lot of the ways, especially in sex addiction, a lot of the ways that people act out are tied to their trauma. So being able to establish sobriety first, if that's a possibility, I think should be attended to first. And then from that more emotionally and lifestyle stable place, get some help with the trauma. In some cases, I've worked with folks where the trauma actually needs to be addressed a little earlier on. But again, with the treatments we have for it, it's not like sitting down and rehashing everything that's happened and reliving it again. In fact, good trauma treatment is not about reliving or re-experiencing, it's about reprocessing. And so that can also be done early on with a good trauma and addiction therapist who understands the key pieces to look at. So I guess basically what I'm saying is don't make that call all by yourself and say, well, I'm going to work on my trauma now and then go, read a bunch. Like, work with a professional who can help and who can guide and who can hold you safely every step of the way as you're working on that.
And there's a symbiotic relationship, for lack of a better term, between trauma and addiction. I mean, unresolved trauma teaches us that to be vulnerable with other people, we're likely to get traumatized again. To trust other people, we're likely to get traumatized again. So if I'm John's 8-year-old son and he doesn't respond to me when it's bedtime and just says, no, go to bed, that's going to be a trauma that I'm going to learn that my father won't be there for me and my mother won't be there for me. And then I'm going to have to learn ways to self-soothe. And that, I'm going to learn emotional escape. I'm going to start, stuffing candy bars in my face in bed, or I'm going to start, I'm going to discover porn, or, all of these things that we learn how to numb out instead of reaching out to other people because we learn that other people can't be trusted. And so trauma eventually does need to be dealt with, almost every addict has unresolved trauma, and it does eventually need to be dealt with, or the desire to return to addiction is always going to be there.
Yeah.
Off base there.
No, that's right on. The whole, I told one client who was finally able to establish some long-term sobriety. They said, "Okay, what's next?" And I said, "Congratulations, we get to work on your trauma."
Yeah, which is no fun. It's even worse than working on the addiction. But this last question that popped in, is trauma always at the core of sex addiction? I think trauma is at the core of every addiction, almost always.
Yeah, there's a lot of ingredients that go into that potion. And I think trauma is almost always one. And if it wasn't pre-existing trauma, addiction certainly by itself, I think qualifies as a traumatizing event because you live as a person that you don't recognize and don't want to be, which I think is pretty rough on the psyche.
Somebody just asked about an intensive program, and I'm typing a suggestion. Somebody asked about a specific treatment program, and I suggested that they email Tammy at seekingintegrity.com. She knows all about pretty much every treatment center and every CSAT on the planet, and she can tell you everything you want to know about them, or at least what she's heard about them.
Yep.
So thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us through the technical glitch at the beginning and my technical glitch in the middle. Anything you want to say to take? Fascinating. Certainty bias, cognitive biases. I love this stuff. So anyway, thank you. Anything you want to say to take us out?
Well, just thank you all for coming. Thanks for the great questions, and it was good to see you again, Scott.
Yep, good to see you. Let me know about the mother and mesh men thing. And all right, we'll be back in 2 weeks, everybody. We'll see you then.
Bye.